I'll be honest, I've really enjoyed this series, this kind of ordinary faithfulness series. If you've been with us, we've been looking at this idea for basically in the fall and now even into January, this commitment to obscurity in a world of celebrity. And I know it's, that I remember when the series first started, TD, I was like, world of celebrities. Who needs to be a celebrity? Celebrities need to be liked by everyone. I'm like, looking around the room like, yeah, some of y'all probably need to listen to this in LA, Hollywood, some of you young artists, and this is good. This is good for them. You ever had that moment like where someone's preaching and you're like, hey, this is for you today. This is yours. I hope you're listening, And the Holy Spirit's like, that's not the right posture. But I'm like, celebrities need to be liked by everyone. I don't need to be liked by everyone. I just need to be liked by everyone I know. That's and I was like, maybe this series is for me. And the more it went on, the more I began to realize, like, man, this is really speaking to me in light of 2022. I mean, 2022 was one of the hardest years of my life and for our family's life. And in 20 years of marriage, my wife and I really just faced a lot of challenges. And it had to do with really this specific idea of wanting and trying to control and gain the approval of others. And we just had some painful moments in our personal life and in my professional life that were tied to other people's opinions of us and primarily of me. And there were times where we had falling out with friends and coworkers because of gossip and slander and even lies that I would hear that were being spread. And I just had this kind of urge to try to go around and have a meeting with every single person in my life to try to set the story straight, to try to kind of control the narrative, say, no, that's not true. Let me tell you what happened. See, I know you probably think this about me, but that's wrong. You should think this about me. And it was just exhausting. And I realized I can't do it. I mean, I can't control what other people think about me. And it was beginning to kind of take over my life in a way. And I just had to stop and kind of get right with God and kind of surrender it. But that was my temptation all year. And in some ways, I realized as I began to think, like, why is this such a big deal for me? In some ways, I'm wired this way. A couple years ago, I had a sabbatical, and I did a deep dive into the Enneagram. Anyone into the Enneagram? Come on. Like, who's gone down the rabbit hole, right? And you're like, oh, my gosh. If you're not familiar with the Enneagram, it's kind of this ancient personality inventory, kind of these 9 archetypes that describe different types of people. And so I'm an Enneagram 3, and the 3 is this kind of achiever or performer. And I remember when I first started reading about the 3, I'm like, let's see, who am I? Oh, driven, yeah, charismatic, winsome. It's like, ooh, I like this. This is fun. I don't know what you guys are, but I like who I am. And I'm like reading books, and then one day I saw this description. 3s often determine what behavior is most admirable in any context and then conform to that expectation to gain the recognition and affirmation of others. Ow, ouch. Like, unhealthy 3s care more about how they are perceived by others, and they live with an ongoing and increasing need for affirmation. Ouch again? Like, ooh, can we go back to winsome? I liked winsome. That was such a fun word. It's like Enneagram 3s, by nature, because of this kind of desire to view themselves through the lens of others, we struggle with people-pleasing. This life that is motivated by trying to please other people around us. And that impulse can actually become an addiction, and a form of kind of affirmation addiction, that I just have to kind of keep getting more of it. Come on, I need the affirmation. Just put it right in my veins. It makes me feel so alive and meaningful and important. There's a book actually called The Disease to Please, written by author Harriet Breaker, where she breaks down this idea that people-pleasing is actually a form of addiction. And she tries to make the point that just as a drug addict seeks drugs, that people-pleasers seek approval. And in the same way that a drug addict can build a tolerance and then need more and more, that kind of approval addicts can do the same thing. They can seek the approval of one person, and that's good enough, and then all of a sudden it's not good enough anymore. Now they need a whole group of people, and now they need people they don't even know, and now they need all the people online, and all of a sudden this kind of addiction spirals out of control. And so she identified some of the characteristic symptoms of people pleasers, people with these addictions. So I'm going to read these, and just so I don't feel so vulnerable up here, if any of these resonate with you, just kind of say ouch under your breath, okay? Just not loud, you don't have to like proclaim it, it's not a testimony, just a little ow. Okay, here we go, first one. A tendency to take criticism personally. Yeah, thank you, that's good. a constant fear of rejection from those around them. Ouch. A difficulty in expressing your true feelings to others. Ouch. A reluctance to say no even when it's clear that you should. Ouch. Mm-hmm. An obsession with never disappointing anyone or letting others down. Mm-hmm. And finally, a determination to not burden others with my own needs or problems. Ouch. I was in therapy one time. I wasn't going to tell the story, but now I have to tell it. I was in therapy one time, and I was talking to my therapist, and we were talking about healthy people. And she said to me, healthy people ask for what they need in life. And I went, really? I thought healthy people were able to meet all their needs. That's what made them healthy. And my therapist goes, that's ridiculous. And I'm like, maybe that's what's going on in my relationships right now, is I don't understand what it means to be healthy. And so I'm really growing and being able to. I remember one time I said to my wife, because she asked me something, I said, it must be nice just ask for what you need in life. And she's like, yeah, that's what healthy people do. I'm like, I'm working on that one. To be honest, when I look at that list and I hear as many ouches as I did, I don't think this is an Enneagram 3 problem. I mean, this is just a human problem, right? I mean, people-pleasing is something that we all struggle with. And I see it all the time, just kind of going around life here in Burbank, right? You see in stores, you see parents constantly trying to please their children, children begging for more, and all of a sudden it kind of seems like the kid's in control of this relationship, and the parents just trying to just be happy, just settle down, just what do I need to do to make you like me, to make you not upset with me right now? And then I've got high school kids, and I see it in conversations amongst high schoolers of kids constantly monitoring what do they need to do to please their parents? What's the standard their parents have for them? How do I earn their approval? How do I make sure that I'm living up to their expectations? What do they want me to do with my life? Adults going to work, trying to impress their coworkers, trying to impress their neighbors, buying things, purchasing what they wear, what they present online. I mean, all of social media is kind of based on this idea of not just presenting ourselves, but presenting ourselves in a way that we gain affirmation and likes from others, right? It's so easy to define our value on the affirmation of others and to get into this rhythm to a point where it becomes an addiction and we get enslaved to it. And it becomes these chains that we can't get out of, and it's so detrimental to our spiritual health. I remember reading this years ago from, I think the guy's name was Robert McGee. He said, if Satan had a formula for self-worth he would love you to buy into, it would be this: self-worth equals performance plus the opinion of others. Self-worth equals performance plus the opinion of others. That's what people-pleasing will do to you. It'll lead you into that recipe for disaster. And ultimately, you'll never be able to feel worth enough because you can't control your performance all the time, and you definitely can't control the performance of others. So how do we get free from this bondage, right? How do we kind of unlock these chains of affirmation addiction? Well, the Apostle Paul has a great kind of solution that is evolving out of his own life and his own conditions, that in a letter that he writes to the church in Corinth. In the book of 1 Corinthians, he is actually kind of facing this celebrity culture temptation that we've been talking about a lot here in the last couple months. He's wrestling with his own temptation to live a life of people-pleasing. If you remember the context of 1 Corinthians, Paul and another man named Apollos have been in town and have been teaching and kind of building a following. And again, back there, many people are illiterate. The way that they receive information, new ideas, is often through the public proclamation in the public square or in the synagogue. And so to kind of have a favorite teacher would be almost like having an influencer that you follow today, or a celebrity that you look to for fashion or ideas or technology that you might want to try yourself. And so Paul and Apollos have become kind of celebrities in this town. In fact, not just are they becoming kind of celebrities, but they're becoming like rival celebrities. And it's like, who do you follow? Are you a Paul guy or an Apollos guy? Team Paul, Team Apollos, who are you into? And then each group judging, who's a better teacher and who you should follow. And so this is what's going on. And all of a sudden, Paul's realizing this. He's getting this word that, hey, since you left, everyone is kind of divided now into who's a better teacher. And so he writes back and he says, listen, guys, this is 1 Corinthians 3. When one person says, I'm with Paul, and the other says, I'm with Apollos, are you not just ordinary people? Meaning, aren't you just acting like the world? I mean, you're not acting like followers of Jesus. You don't have the right orientation. Don't do that. Don't live according to those prideful human desires. He writes, what then is Apollos? And what is Paul? Servants through whom you believed, even as the Lord gave opportunity to each one. I planted, Apollos watered, but God was causing the growth. So that neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but it's God who causes the growth. Enough with a popularity contest, right? Enough with that. Now, the irony is, of course, that's pretty mature from Paul, because if someone said, man, the whole town is broken out in celebrity worship of you, it would have been so easy to kind of lean into that. And really, well, what did they say? What's their favorite lesson that I gave? I could give that some more, Why am I better than Apollos? And instead, he's like, no, stop. I can't get sucked into this culture of celebrity. Because once I do that, once I give myself to that culture, it's going to lead to an addiction and enslavement to people-pleasing. No. That's not who I am. I'm just a servant. I'm not a celebrity. And the point he's trying to make into the church here is like, listen, no. The messenger is nothing. The message is everything. I was just a servant giving you the message of Jesus Christ. Stop looking at the messenger, okay? I'm nothing. It's not about me. Get your attention off of me. Do you ever see, when they have like a live reporter on the scene of a disaster or weather or something, and, that's where all of your attention's supposed to be, on that reporter, and then someone's walking by in the background, and they're like, is that a camera? And they're just like, and the reporter can't really see him. Sometimes they're kind of like they got to focus, but you're watching at home like, who is this idiot in the back trying to make it all about them? It's not about you. It's about the person who's got the spotlight on them. And I think that's somehow how we can get as Christians, like, right? We've got this message, all this good news. We can actually get rewarded. It's like Jesus in the front trying to get all the attention. We're in the back like, hey, look at me. And Paul's like, let's not do that. The messenger is nothing. The message is everything. And so that's the context of our text today. That's the background. This is what leads up to now his kind of solution for people pleasing. And so I'm going to call it this morning 4 keys to unlocking the prison of people pleasing as we look at 1 Corinthians 4. I'm going to read the text, these just 5 verses, 1 through 5, and I'm going to read them in 2 sections, and then we'll kind of find our keys as we go along. Verse 1. This is how one should regard us, as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it is required of stewards that they be found faithful. But with me, it is a very small thing that I should be judged by you or by any human court. 4 keys to unlocking the prison of people pleasing. The first key, minimize my focus on what others think of me. Paul says, as I'm living out this calling as a messenger, I must be found faithful. Well, how do I know if I'm being found faithful? Here's what I'm doing. I'm not going to look to the people that are receiving the message to find out if I'm becoming faithful. In the same way that a shepherd doesn't look to the sheep to go, did I do a good job today? Did you like the water? Did you like the grass? No, the shepherd's taking care of the sheep, and then he goes back. In those days, the shepherd was hired by the person who owned the estate, and he says, hey, they look healthy, they drank. How did I do? He's not looking to the sheep for approval. He looks to the master, so to speak, for approval, or the owner of the sheep. And Paul's like, I'm not looking to people for approval. They are not going to be my judge and jury as to whether or not I delivered the message well. Now, in one sense, all of us have a calling, like Paul says here, to be messengers of the gospel. Right? I mean, that's part of what it means to be a disciple of Christ and to make disciples is to live a life that proclaims the message. But in another way, Paul's calling that he's referring to here is unique. It's a specific calling on his life to basically be kind of an itinerant church planter and teacher. And so you may not have that specific calling on your life, but you may sense that God has given you a unique calling to be a parent. To be in a marriage relationship and to be a good spouse, to be an artist, to be a teacher. Maybe the profession that you're in for you was something that you felt a sense of calling to, and you're trying to do it in a way that honors God. And so it's easy when you're in this place of calling to then think, well, am I being faithful to my calling, and how do I know? And Paul's saying, don't look to the people around you to be the judge and jury. He uses a little phrase here. He says, it's a small thing that I be judged or evaluated or assessed by you. And then he says, or by any human court. Now, most of us are not thinking about a court evaluating us. And to be honest, this is a kind of a tricky little phrase in Greek. But what Paul is really talking about here is not an actual legal courtroom. The word really means any group of kind of self-appointed critics. So any small group of people in your life who kind of convene for the purpose of judging others. You got any of those in your life? Right? You got any like cousins who always get together and talk about you behind your back and judge how, successful you are or what you're doing in LA or why don't you move out of there or what's wrong with you? Why are you dating that person? Making all these comments. You got any kind of office water cooler gang who's always evaluating people's performance, always kind of ripping on others behind their back? If you're a student, you got that like clique at school that's super judgy over everything you wear and, whether or not, oh, you got 100 cheater. I'm sure you're cheating. ChatGPT wrote that for you, didn't it? Yeah, AI. Yeah, it's like, no. He's like any group of people who come together for the purpose of evaluating you, I'm not going to live my life for their approval. He said, I'm going to live out my calling, but I'm not going to be unduly influenced by the opinion of others. I'm just not going to become a slave to people-pleasing. I'm going to minimize what others think of me. That second key, then, he says, remember, what others think of me is a small thing. The biblical perspective on people-pleasing is it's a small thing. Hear me now. It's not nothing. It's something. It's just a small thing. We can't totally eliminate it, but we minimize it. And I say, why can't we totally eliminate it? Because if you totally eliminate your desire to evaluate your life through the eyes of others, you become a sociopath, right? You have to have some level of self-awareness that, hey, I think I'm talking too much in this meal, and people are trying to give me little cues that, hey, maybe we should let others talk, or have a little bit of EQ, like that emotional awareness to kind of know that, hey, maybe my behavior is affecting someone in a negative way, and they're giving me cues so that I know that I could change. This is some level of people-pleasing is important to just function in society, okay? So it is something, it's just a small thing. Now, what's interesting is that in the New Testament, there are a couple times where Paul, the same Paul here who says, it's a small thing that I be judged by you, and I'm so over people-pleasing. There's other times where he goes, actually, you know what, church, you need to stop what you're doing and please other people for a moment. This something is actually a big thing right now. And it specifically happens 2 times around this idea of the way mature Christians in the church are interacting with immature Christians in the church. And it has to do with this idea of eating meat sacrificed to idols. And for the mature Christians, they're like, not a big deal, doesn't bother me, it's just a steak, I don't really care where it came from, I didn't track it, But for the immature Christians who have just come out of this idol worship where that meat was part of their old idol sacrifice, they're like, what? I can't believe you do that. And so he says, you know what? Listen, you need to stop eating that meat in order to please your immature brothers because you're laying a stumbling block. So change your behavior to make someone else happy. In that situation, here's what it does. It honors them and it honors God. So there could be a good motivation for people-pleasing. Not often, but sometimes. And in that situation, if it's honoring them and honoring God to do something that gains approval, Paul says, actually, that's a good time to do it. It's not nothing. It's something. It's just a small thing. So I was thinking this week, remember it's a small thing. How do we remember things in life? What are some of the tools that we use? And I thought songs, right? The lyrics I've never studied any of the lyrics of these songs, but I just know them because I've played them. So I was like, what's a theme song for this verse? That it's and I thought, my gosh, we live in Southern California. We all know. We all have a people-pleasing theme song. That's like ingrained in us. It's a small thing after all. It's a small thing after all. It's a small thing after all. It's a small, small thing. So when you go around life and you're tempted to be like, I don't think they're upset. I don't know what they're thinking about me. Just start humming. Evan will think you went to Disney. You know, they'll be like, oh my gosh, you went to, that's it. Went to Disney. You know, it's like, no, I'm just trying to care less about you and what you think of me right now. All right. So other reminders, visual reminders, right? We put little Post-it notes or little things in our life that every time I see that, our family's been kind of apartment sitting for a neighbor upstairs who is, long story, kind of like a high-end butler, you know, and cares for horses. So he's on some incredible horse estate up in like Vancouver and asked us to kind of just keep an eye on the apartment. He's got these amazing antiques. You ever just kind of get access to someone else's apartment and you're like reading every book and, you know, totally judging their DVD collection, you know, and like antiques. And the other day I looked on this table and he had this old brass antique box. And it's got just a little, I have no idea what this is. At first I thought it was like a pill box, but then I'm like, even 100 years ago, I think people knew not to put pills in brass. Like, that's probably not good for your body, you know? We had a theory that maybe it's like for stamps or something. I don't think of paper. I don't know what this is. But it's so cool and it's so ornate. And I thought, you know what this is? This is a people-pleasing box, okay? This is as much energy as you can give to people-pleasing in your life, okay? This is where you put the opinions of others. Right here. And so every day you come home and you think, okay, what opinions are important to me? And I can't hold on to all of them. I can't care what Paul says. I can't care what Judy says. I can care what my wife says. I'm going to put that in there. Okay. Oh, it's full. Guess that's it for today. All right. Guess I just have to not care about all the other opinions. So, I mean, just find a small box in your house, you know, a little matchbox or something, and just put it in a place where you're going to see it every day. And let it be a visual reminder that it's a small thing what other people think about you in life. Minimize my focus on what others think of me. Remember it's a small thing. The third and fourth keys come from the second half of the text here. Paul says, in fact, I do not even judge myself. For I am not aware of anything against myself, but I am not thereby acquitted. It is the Lord who judges me. Therefore, do not pronounce judgment before the time, before the Lord comes, who will bring to light the things now hidden in darkness and will disclose the purposes of the heart. Then each one will receive his condemnation from God. His commendation from God. It's a big difference. Let's give one more run at that. Then each one will receive his commendation from God. Third key, maximize my focus on what God thinks of me. So what's the alternative to people-pleasing, according to Paul? Where do we turn our energy? He says it there in verse 4. It's the Lord who examines me. Our ambition is to please God. Notice, and this is important, I think, in our culture today, notice that the solution to people-pleasing is not pleasing myself. Okay? I don't replace the opinion of others with having a higher opinion of myself. It's not just high self-esteem. Because Paul says, even when I do the right thing, I may not be doing it for the right reasons. You ever have that moment, you know, where people are like, wow, that was so great that you did that. And you're like, yeah, thanks. And inside you're like, yeah, that was bad motivation. That was just all for me. So Paul's like, there are times in which I do the right thing for the wrong reasons. And there are times in which I don't know why I did it. He goes, even if I can't think of a reason that I did it that was bad, it doesn't mean I'm acquitted. He's like, who knows? The human heart is complex and deceitful, and I have no idea. I'm just going to let God decide. I'm not even going to validate or acquit myself. It's not about pleasing myself. That's not big enough. It's about trying to live a life that pleases God. In a sense, what Paul's saying here is, I'm not who others say I am, and I'm not even who I say I am. I'm only who God says I am. And our identity formation is kind of this process of coming to believe that we are who Jesus says we are. To begin to see ourselves the way God sees us. No matter what others think of us, or no matter what stories or labels we might even use for ourselves, we're invited into this new identity through Jesus Christ. I mean, this is the meta-narrative of Scripture is God offering his people a new identity. This idea that we were all born, made in the image of God, to image God into the world, to represent him and to multiply his presence. But ever since the first human was born and began to make decisions, we all have kind of a bent away from obedience, a bent away from God's best. We all, instead of walking a straight line, walk a crooked line through life. And so the image of God gets distorted through our actions. And after thousands of years, so to speak, of society living according to that way, and God's image being more and more distorted, even by a community who was meant to represent him in the world, God finally said, enough is enough. I'm going to send the actual image to earth in human form. And Jesus Christ comes to become the ultimate human, the representation of God in human form, so that the whole world can look and go, oh, that's what God is actually supposed to look like. And then Jesus not only models the nature of God, but ultimately, as God, embraces a sacrificial death on the cross so that he can reconcile us back into a relationship with his Father. And that through the Holy Spirit, he can restore us to being image bearers in the fullness of our lives. And so what he ultimately does then is he gives us this new identity, that we are no longer sinners, we're now saints. We're no longer exiles, we're now embraced into the family. We're no longer orphans, we're sons and daughters. And the Bible's filled with all this language that talks about our new identity. One in which we are loved and valued and perfect and blameless. And one that is not based on our performance. It's not performance plus the opinion of others. It's grace-based. It's the performance and the work of Christ on our behalf. And so I become the object of God's affection through the blood of Jesus. And I have access to an inexhaustible supply of unconditional love and acceptance and a value that is not dependent on my performance or the opinions of others anymore. And so Paul is saying that is the judge and jury that I care about. I want to ultimately live my life that pleases God because God has expressed that through Jesus, he's already pleased with me. So I'm not earning his pleasure. I'm living out his pleasure in my own life. So the third key is to maximize our thoughts and understanding of what God thinks of us. What will God think if I do this? How will this honor or dishonor God? How does this decision impact God's kingdom on earth? And then the fourth and final key. Remember, what God thinks of me is an eternal thing. It's not a small thing. It's not even a big thing. It's an eternal thing. It's a forever thing. That ultimately what God thinks of me is the only thing that matters in the end. This being kind of NFL playoff weekend, I thought I'd kind of close with a story from my own life and my early days of ministry. The first kind of opportunity I had to lead any sort of group was a Fellowship of Christian Athletes group back at the college that I went to. And I was 21, 22, my senior year, and then my first year out of college on campus and working with athletes. And one of the kind of most transformational stories at that time was a guy that I ended up living with named Mike. And Mike was the star football quarterback, had been highly recruited to this school out of Pennsylvania, and his junior year was tearing it up. And they were having a fantastic season, and there was talk about the NFL scouts coming and looking at him, and his whole dream was to finish that season, have a great senior season, and go on to the NFL. And even though he was a little shorter, this was a dream that he actually believed could happen. And then he tore his ACL. And midway through his junior year, his season ends, and he goes to the hospital. And that first week, everyone visited him from the team. All the coaches, all the players, everyone was there. I mean, he was such a little celebrity in our kind of small college town. And then a week went by, and then he went home, and all of a sudden, everyone stopped visiting. And his entire life, which had been about the crowds and the accolades and the awards, just turned into him alone in a bed and him alone with a therapist doing rehab, and it just rocked his identity. And he just didn't know who he was anymore without any of those things. And in that time, he ended up, as he tells the story to me, he goes, I just literally had a Bible that I found, and I picked it up and started reading it and started asking questions. And then he reached out to me and started joining one of my Bible studies and with FCA guys and kind of caught fire for knowing more about Jesus and realizing that the place that he had invested all of his life was so temporary and so fickle, and that there was this other identity being offered him that wasn't based on his performance and couldn't be taken away by an injury. And so that entire year while he was physically rehabbing, he was basically spiritually being reborn as well. And it was such an incredible opportunity and privilege to walk with him during that time and to see the impact he had on others and to see him get baptized and all those sorts of things. And then eventually, through rehab, he redshirted and got a senior year and was able to play. And that was the year we lived together. And I remember, he didn't tell me this, but somewhere along the line, I must have read this analogy or this line because it ended up being written up in the local paper. But a reporter came to him on one of the first games after the game when he had been back and noticed just a little sticker that he had put. And it just said, "Play for an audience of one." And the reporter said, "Mike, what does that mean?" And he said, "Oh, that's just my reminder of why I'm here." He said, my goal this morning, or my goal today when I go out, God's my only audience. I just want to honor him with how I played today. And I just thought, what a transformation from a guy who is so motivated, compelled to the people-pleasing celebrity world to realize how ultimately deceitful that is, what a bondage that can be, and to turn his whole life around to the point where he said, "You know what? I just want to honor God. I just want to live for an audience of one." And I love the idea that he created a reminder. He created a box, he created a song, he had a sticker, he put something up as a reminder that it's a small thing that I be judged by others, but it's an eternal thing, what God thinks of me. You're not as good as your supporters say you are. You're not as bad as your critics say you are. You're just who Jesus says you are. As a tradition we have here at Media City, we kind of like to close by giving people the opportunity to spend some time in reflection and let the Spirit speak to us. And my prayer this week has been that even in this time, that the Spirit might convict us of areas of our life in which we've been giving ourselves over to people-pleasing, but also might begin to kind of unlock and free us from some of the bondages that we've had and give us the courage to live a life for an audience of one. So let's take that time now and let God speak to us.